Hello friends, today we are here to do my September reading wrap up. That is, we're going to rank and review the 10 books that I finished in September. But firstly, let's go over some stats. These come from the story graph. As I said, I read 10 books in September for a total of 3,060 pages, which is about an average of 306 pages per book. By far, the moods that I read the most of was adventurous and emotional, with some lighthearted and hopeful vibes in there as well. 70% of the books that I read were medium-paced, 30% were fast. Half of the books that I read were under 300 pages, and half of them were between 300 and 500. None over 500 this month. I read only fiction in September, no non-fiction. As for genres, the story graph says that 5 of the books that I read fell under the category of fantasy, 3 fell under the category of middle fiction, 3 science fiction, and then we've got some LGBTQIA+, children's, young adult, and historical as well. All of the books that I read this month I did read physical copies of, and I do own all of the books that I read this month. I also listened while reading most of these books. I've been doing a lot of blended reading lately. As for my star reviews, my average rating is 4 stars. 4 stars neat. That's pretty good. 2 of the books I read, I gave 3 stars. 6 of the books I read, I gave 4 stars. 2 of them, I gave 5 stars. So overall, I definitely say it felt like a pretty solid reading month. Now let's get to ranking and reviewing the books, starting with the books I didn't like so much. Well, I mean, I did give the lowest ranked ones 3 stars, so they weren't too bad. So my least favourite read of the month was Treasure in the Lake by Pamment. This is a graphic novel that's aimed for ages 10 and over, and this is one of the books that has been shortlisted for the Readings Children's Prize. So I read several of these in the month of September, so quite a few will be coming up. If you've already seen that video, you will know that I enjoyed all of those books. This one I have to say I personally enjoyed the least, which I was a little bit sad about because it is the only graphic novel shortlisted, and I love graphic novels. This is basically an adventure discovery kind of story featuring 2 characters from a very small, sleepy kind of town. Iris is a young girl with big dreams who dreams of moving to the city or making big discoveries, whereas Sam is a bit more laid back and chill, and he's quite happy being from a small town. So they're kind of like unlikely best friends, and they go off exploring together and end up coming across this lost city. So like I said, a bit of an adventure with plenty of mystery and intrigue and a little bit of time travel too. The art in this is absolutely lovely. The characters I thought were really sweet. I enjoyed watching their friendship grow and develop. I guess I just didn't fall in love with this story in the way that I was hoping to. At the end of the day, adventure, middle grade graphic novels, like nothing has even come close to Lightfall for me. And I know it's a bit unfair to compare novels like this to Lightfall, but even books like Amulet just have a little bit, I don't know, just a little bit of that X factor that I didn't feel in this book. I thought it was fun and it was sweet, and I'm sure plenty of readers will enjoy it. I just wasn't swept away. For me personally, it was just good. And I have to say I was a little surprised to feel kind of similarly about The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I actually read 2 books by Becky Chambers this month, so you'll be seeing another one later in the video, but this is the first in the Wayfarer series. And it seems like this is the series that sort of made Becky Chambers the beloved author that she is. This was not my introduction to her personally though. I started with the Monk and Robot series, which I love on a whole nother level. This is a bit more sci-fi space opera kind of feeling than the Monk and Robot series is. This is set on a spaceship in space in the future, and we follow this ragtag bunch of weirdos and cute, quirky people as they set out to complete a job that is kind of like above what they've been doing in the past and proves to have its own challenges. However, this does not have the sort of pace or plot that you kind of associate with space opera and sci-fi novels. Instead, this is primarily just about relationships and characters. Stuff is happening, but any sense of tension there could be is very quickly resolved, very neatly resolved. It's all just very cute and cozy. It honestly felt like the cute queer version of Firefly. I mean, it's been literally a decade since I watched that show, and I don't even know if I watched all of it, but I just had Firefly kind of vibes in terms of like this ragtag bunch of people sort of like getting together on a spaceship and making the most of it, even if they don't have, you know, the high tech stuff that maybe a lot of the other people doing the same sort of things do. We've got a captain who is just as much a friend as he is a captain, or at least he's trying to be. One thing I did really enjoy was how alien the aliens felt, and how that was often part of like the interactions between the characters. In here, a lot of them are humanoid, but it's very clear that their societal norms and their cultural expectations are very, very different. And so all of these different aliens, including humans, coming together is just a really interesting thing to watch happen. However, as I said, there is literally no tension in this story, and so while it was cute it did feel quite long for what it was. I don't know, I guess I just wasn't swept up in this in the same way that I have been with the Monk and Robot series. But again, it is still 3 stars. I didn't hate it or anything. I was surprised that I didn't love this more. I have had people tell me that they think that this will be a series that I'll love, especially after my success with the Monk and T Robot series. You know what I mean? Her other series. I was really expecting to adore this in a similar way that I did with A Psalm for the Wild build. Alas, I did not. However, I did speak to a friend at work who said that this is not really as good as the series has to offer, and she encouraged me to continue with the series, and I already own a couple more books, so I will try to keep going with Becky Chambers. So yeah, a little disappointing in the fact that I had high expectations, but I still overall enjoyed my time well enough with this book. My next 4-star read is another one of the children's shortlisted books, and that is The Sugarcane Kids and the Red Bottom Boat by Charlie Archbold. So this is another one that I have spoken about in my review of the shortlist, which will be in the description box below if you'd like to hear some more full thoughts that I'm going to share today. But basically this is like an adventure mystery contemporary story set in far north Queensland, featuring a ragtag bunch of kids. And the older cousin of one of these kids, whose name is Jacob, has basically been accused of stealing. And these kids, along with their family, really believe that Jacob would not do such a thing. He's a really well-liked kid, and so they believed he's been framed. And these kids have decided to take it upon themselves to find out what really happened. And in the process, of course, clear Jacob's name. And so they follow some leads, and it leads them down some unexpected avenues, including some creeks full of mangroves and crocodiles. I really liked this story. It's not very long. It's quite fun to read. It is a middle grade sort of age story. And I think the thing that I liked most about it was watching these 5 very different kids come together. Not all of whom like each other at the beginning of the book, but they understand that it's important what they're doing, and they develop a really close bond and appreciation of each other's strengths through the process of working together. I also like, and this might be a small detail, but I really appreciated how Andy, our main character's parents, are divorced, but they have a pretty good relationship with each other. And so often in children's fiction, we see divorce depicted as something like really horrific and traumatic, and I know that it can be, and it has been for many people, but it's also just nice to see it represented in like a reasonably normal, healthy kind of way. And I just really liked that. It's something that I noticed. It's a small detail, but I think it was really intentionally done, and I thought it was good. Also, I love the setting. It's evoked really well, and as someone who is from North Queensland, I can tell you that Charlie, she got it right. So the stakes are pretty high in this novel. Obviously, they're trying to avoid a young, innocent boy, well, he's a young man, going to jail for a crime he did not commit. And without making light of that situation, overall the book does feel still quite fun. It was a solid read, and it's one that I love to recommend to kids who want some adventure and mystery in a contemporary setting. Next up, we have A Prayer for the Crownshy by Becky Chambers. This is, of course, the second Becky Chambers book on this list, and this is the second book in the Monk and Robot series. In September, I did a reading vlog reading 3 of my highly anticipated sequels, and this was among them. And if you've watched that, you will know that although I really enjoyed this, it did not quite hit the heights of A Psalm for the Wild built for me. But overall, I was just so happy to be back in this world and back with Dex and Mosscap, because I love those 2 characters and their relationship and just watching them interact. This is a really sweet series of novellas. There's 2 out so far by Becky Chambers, and it's basically set in this world that has averted climate catastrophe by, you know, humans changing their unsustainable ways. And there's sentient robots who have been living in the wilderness away from humans for a few hundred years. And one has returned to just like check on the humans and see how they're doing. And that one robot's name is Mosscap, and it makes friends with a T-Monk named Dex. In this installment, the second installment, Dex and Mosscap have made it back to like the human part of the world, and Dex is introducing Mosscap to people. We also learn a little bit more about Dex, and we even meet their family, and it's just all very cute. Also, these covers are just absolutely gorgeous. So although this was not like the 5-star favorite of the year kind of level A Psalm for the Wild built was, I still loved this, and I still love this world, and I can't wait for book 3. Another one of my highly anticipated sequels was Amari and the Great Game. If you watched that video, you might have noticed that in that video I had the proof. Well, I liked it so much that I had to buy myself an actual copy of the book. Amari and the Night Brothers was the first book, which honestly became a bit of a sensation here on BookTube, and it's this middle grade fantasy story about a young girl named Amari who finds out that she has magical powers, and she ends up becoming part of this bureau, the society of like supernatural people, and she finds out that she's actually like a bit more magical than she's supposed to be, Anyway, chaos ensues. There's lots of mysteries and things that Amari is trying to solve and figure out. And in this second installment, we watch her as she both tries to solve the mystery of why the Parliament is basically frozen in time and bad things are now happening, but also has to secretly participate in this magical duel. There's quite a lot going on. It's pretty intense, but it all comes together really well. And I have mentioned that I did have some criticisms of the first book in terms of the pacing and some of the writing. It just honestly felt clunky. That is the best word I can think of to describe not all of that first book, but enough of it to have bothered me. This book, though, I think was much better. I already was in love with the character of Amari, but now we get to see her and her story, I don't know, just really fleshed out in a way that works and was wholly immersive for me. And it does leave us on a bit of a cliffhanger, so I cannot wait for book 3. I love this series. I love recommending this series. It's just so good. And then the third book in that anticipated sequels video was A Venom Dark and Sweet by Judy, the second book in the Book of Tea series. This is a YA high fantasy series based on Chinese culture and mythology, and the magic system is based around tea and the art of tea making. And like there's this whole adventure, and in the first book this whole like trial game sort of situation set up. All of that is very interesting, but primarily the best parts about this book are the tea making and the vibes and the atmosphere that brings to the book. This second book does feel quite different to the first. The first book is very much set in the capital and it feels quite small with this like trial going on. This second book expands and we're like out in the world on this big quest thing. And I can't say I loved it quite as much, but I think I've given both books 4 stars. And at the end of the day, it was that tea making and the descriptions of tea and food and that all of those vibes and atmosphere that I liked so much about the first, and that is still present in the second. I am going to be doing a full review of this duology, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I'll just let you know that although I know that not everybody is loving this series, I've really enjoyed my time with it. And if you're looking for some cozy, easy to read YA fantasy, I think this is a solid pick. My next 4-star read was The Tropic of Serpents, a memoir by Lady Trent by Marie Brennan. This is the second book in the Lady Trent Memoirs series or the Natural History of Dragons series. I've seen the series called different things. Whatever the case, I'm obsessed with this series. I'm obsessed with Lady Trent and I really enjoyed installment 2. This series is basically told as a memoir by the character Lady Trent later in her life. It's sort of set in like an alternative world, but it's basically Victorian England, except in a world where dragons exist. And Lady Trent has sort of defied all the expectations of her gender and become the foremost expert on dragons. And so we meet her at the end of her career as she is retelling her life story. And the different volumes of this series kind of cover, I don't know, I'd say like 5 to 10 year chunks. This second book is primarily focused on a particular expedition that she and her team make to go find a swamp worm, which is a kind of dragon, and to learn more about it. But the place where the swamp worm resides is kind of like on the border of a very fraught political tension, borderline war sort of scenario. And so despite her naivety at the beginning thinking, I'm just going to study dragons, I'm a scientist, I don't have to, even think about the politics of this situation, she ends up embroiled in them and it becomes a whole lot more complicated than anyone wanted it to be. So there's lots of like cultural differences, political intrigue and gossip that she has to contend with in this book, as well as the dragons. It is sort of interesting reading this in the sense that although it is a different world, it's a different time, it feels very like Victorian England, just with dragons. Like it might be called Skierland rather than England, but it feels like England. And so that means that when Lady Trent and her team are sort of going to other continents and meeting other cultures, although they do not have names associated with planet Earth and what we know, sometimes it does feel a little coded. And so I'm sure there could be criticisms of the way that this is sort of tackled in terms of some of the elements of that cultural interaction. And I do think that it's interesting in the sense that Lady Trent is clearly looking back and reflecting on her mistakes and things that she would have liked to have done differently. Like I do think that she's trying to be very honest about like her experience and some of the things that maybe she would have done differently. She's very clear about the fact that, sometimes people put these altruistic ideals onto her and she's like, no, that is not why I made the decision or did what I did. And so I think like it feels quite authentic in terms of like a woman of this time period doing the things that she's doing. I don't know, it's an interesting line to walk, but overall I'm just really enjoying the premise and the character of Lady Trent, and this is just a cozy, fun read for me. And finally, my last 4-star read is another sequel. It is the Obelisk by N.K. Jemisin, the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy. Now, I did a vlog trying out N.K. Jemisin a few months ago, in which I did read the first book in the series. I didn't like the other 2 things that I read by her, but I loved the 5th season. To me, that is one of the best books I've ever read. Like, it just felt like a masterclass in storytelling, in fantasy. It was just incredible. And I honestly have been putting off reading the second book because of how much I loved that first book. It was hard not to come in with very high expectations, and I was scared of being disappointed. Now, it's obviously in the 4-star category, so it was not on the same level as the 5th season. I do not think that this is as good a book in terms of the structure and the reveals. It feels, it does have that bit of a feeling of middle book syndrome, not in a necessarily a bad way. It just feels more like a bridging book. It feels like we had this incredible setup and reveals and everything in the first book, and I'm hoping we're going to have some incredible payoff in the third book. But to sort of bridge the gap and get there, we needed some explanation and some more world building and, you know, sort of moving people into place. That's what this book feels like. So it wasn't as captivating and absolutely jaw-dropping as the first, but it was still a good read. Obviously, it's hard to talk about without spoiling book 1, because book 1, I mean, it's just hard to talk about this series in general. It's pretty complex, at least as far as I don't know, maybe I'm just still a baby fantasy reader, so it feels complex, but it feels like there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, a lot of different characters and timelines and all of that good stuff. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling and just say that although I did not love this second book as much as I loved the first, I can see the potential for where we're going for book 3. I'm hoping that it will end off strong, and that although maybe I didn't love this one as much, it will be worth the journey, if that makes sense. And at the end of the day, I still gave it 4 stars. I still loved reading it. And now for my 5-star reads. And both of these are from the children's shortlist for the Readings Prize. And honestly, I don't know how to pick between these 2. They're so different. Even when people have asked me, like at work and I'm talking to colleagues or whatever, about which book I want to win for the Readings Prize, I'm still really struggling to pick between these 2 and also Wheeler, which I read months ago. I'm honestly not sure which one's my favorite. So normally everything is ranked. For these, I'm not quite ready to rank them, so I'm just going to talk about both of them. The first one is The Glasshouse of Stars by Shirley Marr. This is definitely the most emotionally impactful book on the shortlist. It's one of those middle grade stories that just, it hits all the fields. It's so beautifully written, and it is contemporary, but it incorporates this magical realism kind of imaginative element that just makes it all feel so elevated and special. I think it's definitely that kind of middle grade that some kids will love, but adult readers of middle grade will adore. It tackles with some really challenging themes of immigration and cultural differences and racism, while offering this beautifully descriptive, imaginative, magical escape and sense of healing as well. In this story, we meet our main character, Mei, who is a young girl who has just immigrated to Australia with her pregnant mum and her father. They don't know English very well, and they don't have any contacts in Australia. So settling here and sort of figuring out the lay of the land and like feeling a sense of belonging is very challenging for all 3 of them. Although we see the challenges that her mum and her dad are going through, obviously we follow Mei in particular, and her challenges, especially at school, with some bullying and some really casual racism from like teachers and people in power that we see really harm Mei in a way that she doesn't really understand. It's really hard to read. And then tragedy unexpectedly strikes his family and takes this all to a whole nother level. Mei though feels like the house that they're living in is kind of alive, and especially out the back there's this like rundown, busted up old glass house. And when Mei enters, it becomes this sort of like magical imagination realm that offers her a sense of rest and reprieve, but also of healing and belonging. So this is one of those beautiful middle grade novels that tackles with big themes like identity and belonging and overcoming and finding your place while staying true to yourself. And it has some of the most beautiful, honest developments of friendship that I've seen in middle grade in quite a while. It was at once one of the most heart-wrenching and heart-filling reads I've ever read. It was just gorgeous, and now that I'm talking about it, I think this might be my favorite. Having said that, it's like a tricky one to pick for a prize like that, because I do feel like this is the sort of book that especially for children. It's for a particular kind of reader. This is not like this fun adventure book that you pick up for anyone and everyone. But anyway, that's another conversation. I adored this book and I highly recommend it. And so I suppose that means that this is my second favorite book of the month. That is Little Gem by Anna Zobel. This is gorgeous. This is more like, it sort of straddles the line between junior and middle fiction. It's sort of for like 6, 7+. And it's this gorgeous little story of this little witch who goes to witch school, but she doesn't always feel like she's very good at it. And so she's practicing her spells when we first meet her at the beginning of the book. And one spell in particular that she's practicing is her traveling spell. And she's trying to go from one classroom to the next. But instead, she ends up transporting herself very, very far away and 100 years in the future. So she ends up in this cute little seaside town, and it turns out that the people of this town actually really need the help of a witch. And so although she doesn't always feel very confident or competent, Little Gem gets to work trying to help these people and ends up making a home for herself in this little seaside town. It's adorable. It's so sweet. It was just a joy to read, and I have bought myself the second book just so I can keep reading about Little Gem and all the little adventures she gets up to. I said in my review of the shortlist that this feels like a classic. Like I think you can tell, like, that's sort of the vibe of the cover. Like, it almost feels like a reprint of an old long lost classic. And that's just how it reads and how it feels. It's got this really sweet sense of whimsy and charm that I was absolutely won over by. So it's just absolutely gorgeous. I loved it. So that's my ranking and reviews of all of the 10 books that I read in the month of September. I do hope you enjoyed watching along with this video. I'd love to hear in the comments below what you've been reading in September. Let me know if you had any particular highs or particular lows that you'd like to chat about. A big thank you, of course, goes to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon for all of their support, and especially big thank you goes to my high tier patrons, Olivia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. And thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. I will talk to you again soon. Until then, happy reading. Bye.